How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to Agave and Cactus Talk. Today, I wanted to talk about this really great article that I was reading maybe 2 months ago, and I made a podcast on it, but I ended up losing the file, so I ended up re-recording another podcast, which is fine actually because I read a lot of other stuff in between then that I can include in this podcast. So let's talk about it. The article that we're going to be talking about, kind of as like a basis today, is called Insect Wreaks Havoc on Tunisia's Crucial Prickly Pear Industry. The author is Jihad Abdellaoui. Not sure how to pronounce that. Came out July 23rd, 2024 from Realtors, which is a big news brand or whatever. So this article stuck out to me because here in California, around the world, a lot of people are wanting to start up prickly pear plantations and start growing different types of cactus, and I'm seeing a lot of the same issues around the world. And this Tunisian prickly pear industry can provide a lot of great lessons for California's prickly pear industry, which is, how I've explained, pretty non-existent. It's like me and a handful of other people, but the little industry that's here, it will influence us, this article, and teach us a lot of lessons. And I did a podcast on Italians getting into prickly pear production, company named Wakanda that is got a couple hundred acres of prickly pear and planning on planting about 1,000 acres, or about 500 acres, right, within the next few years. So they're actually going through a lot of the framework and groundwork that Tunisia laid down several decades ago. And in my opinion, they're actually going to encounter a lot of the same issues. And California will encounter a lot of the same issues as Tunisia. And it's really interesting to me because being a Mexican, my dad and me are from Jalisco, and my stepdad is from Guanajuato, so I got a lot of knowledge of cactus because of my family that's taught me a lot about it, and going throughout Mexico and seeing a lot of different cactus that are growing, and what people have in their gardens in Mexico. I always tell people that in Mexico, people don't really have landscaping like we do here in LA or in California, where there's a lot of ornamental stuff. In Mexico, if somebody has a garden, usually in the middle or the poor class, they usually have that garden as something that's going to give them benefit. These are the types of gardens I love creating here in LA for my clients. But the cactus that I would see in these gardens or in these small farms in Mexico were really, really diverse. You know what I mean? But then you start getting into a little bit medium-sized farms, and I started seeing a lot of the same stuff that plagues the agave industry, right? Like, a monoculture of certain Opuntia species, which are the prickly pear. And I started seeing that in Mexico, these monoculture systems were being destroyed by all types of plague, from cochineal, which is the plague that they're dealing with in Tunisia, to a plague which they call the black hongo, or the el hongo negro, which is black fungus, and it basically turns, it starts drying out the cactus and turning it black. Cochineal turns the cactus gray. So a lot of these plagues that are in monoculture systems, I believe, are there because nature is sort of telling us, I don't like this system. So let me throw in an insect or a plague in here, a fungus that can destroy this system, right? So nature doesn't allow these monocultures to succeed for long periods of time, right? Like in Mexico, I'll give the example, a lot of the monoculture systems spray very heavy chemicals. So they're doing pre-treatment and post-treatment for fungus, for tons of, insects. And these chemicals are obviously going into the groundwater, going into the soil, in the prickly pears, in the prickly pear pads that we're eating, and are being shipped all over the world. So, it's unlike agave, where I always have this conversation with a lot of people about chemicals in agave, and the distillation process, most of the research that I've read, you're going to have pretty low numbers of any chemicals passing through distillation. Like, it's almost negligible or close to zero, according to a lot of the research. And, that research that I can point to is grain-based spirits that were researched by Asian researchers, and they basically found out that these grain-based spirits, if you lace them with tons of chemicals and then distilled these grains, that like their thesis was, let's see what happens, what chemicals are left in the distillation, and they found close to zero, if not anything, like it's very negligible. So unlike in agave, where the distillation can get rid of a lot of the bad practices that are going on the farm, in prickly pear you don't have that, right? Like if you're directly harvesting from that farm a prickly pear pad or a prickly pear fruit, you have a lot of that chemical in the actual food, right? So how I've mentioned before, I don't really like eating or drinking any wine from Napa Valley unless I know, or really general in California, unless I know the grower, because as a what do you call it, vineyard consultant, I know how they manage a lot of these vineyards, which is with a lot of weed killers like Roundup, and a lot of that stuff has been already researched and tested to be showing up in large quantities in wine. And a lot of people will come in here and say, oh well, there's still quantities of glyphosate in California wines that are still very under the EPA regulated levels. I'll give you that one, but those same levels in Europe or dozens of other countries would not be permissible. So just because we have lax or shitty-ass standards in the U.S. doesn't mean that glyphosate is not something that's damaging your body. In my opinion, any quantity of glyphosate that is entering your body, it's a problem, right? Like, why do you think that there's billions of dollars of lawsuits against Bayer and Monsanto for glyphosate, right? Like, it's been proven to fuck a lot of people up. So, getting back to my point here, yeah, it's going to be in a lot of the cactus, right? So you have to watch out where you're buying your cactus from. I know cactus foods are growing in popularity in the United States, and a lot of people are sourcing cactus from Mexico, and they really don't look at these farms or don't look at how the management of these cactus is occurring, right? So, I mean, there are an amazing amount of small farms in Mexico that are growing cactus without chemicals and doing an amazing job taking care of the environment and all of that, right? But the majority of large cactus farms in Mexico, they're, I would say, on the wrong side of chemical use. So, getting back to this article, in Tunisia, they're looking towards Mexico for inspiration on how to manage a plague, right? So the plague that is affecting Tunisia, which this article that I mentioned is about, is the cochineal, which is, let me see the exact name of this little pesky bug here. It's called Dactylopius opuntiae. So this little bug here is usually, well, let me begin by saying this. It's like cochineal has been grown for thousands of years in Mexico, and it's been managed in a sustainable polyculture system where this agave wasn't in a monoculture system and could be managed instead of it taking over the whole farm, right? So this dye, or this cochineal, has traditionally been made into red and purple dyes that went all over the world, and until the 1800s was one of the primary forms of red dye in the world. So, you know, me thinking over here, I'm like, well, one man's issue is another man's solution sometimes, you know what I mean? It's like these guys in Tunisia are dealing with cochineal, and in Mexico and other monoculture systems like in Brazil, but they let it get so out of control that it's not in a management anymore. It's in a crisis mode where it's just destroying the cactus. And it's like, why don't they, from the beginning of this onset of this plague, start to actually harvest it and start to, you know, get it off the plant, right? Because it could be managed in a very good way, and instead of having a lot of their production go to shit in Tunisia, which is occurring, they could essentially harvest the cochineal and make their own dyes that are organic and not synthetic, and sell that to the world, right? So one man's issue is another man's problem, right? It's like, let me explain this real quick. It's like, there's the cochineal cactus, which is Opuntia cochineal, and that cactus lives very symbiotically with cochineal. If you manage it and you're always harvesting this on a daily basis, it lives symbiotically. It's always growing. The new growth is all green. You can eat it. The prickly pears are all nice and you can eat them. It's all Gucci, right? Well, on a lot of other species like Opuntia ficus indica, which is one of the most cloned and heavily planted around the world, which is what Tunisia's got and what Italy is planting, and there's a lot of it in Brazil, this cochineal doesn't live symbiotically. If it gets on it and you're not managing it every day, which could be literally impossible depending on the size of your farm, then it's going to take over and destroy it, right? And by not having polyculture systems, if it's going on one plant, it's going like wildfire throughout the whole frickin', you know, throughout the whole ranch or the whole farm. So I'm over here like, man, like, this just is showing me a lot of mismanagement that's happening around the world, right? Because these monoculture systems, the way that they're managing them, are just inviting plague, right? It's like, imagine you're a plague, right? Where do you want to be? In a little polyculture system where there's a couple of these trees that you know how to annihilate? Or would you like to be in this field where everything in this field is something that you know and can annihilate, right? So nature takes advantage of these monoculture systems and puts in, you know, the counter, the fungus, the pest, and just wipes it out. So, you know, let me give some quick you know, facts right here, right? So Tunisia, let's try to put it in perspective, right? Like, where the hell even is Tunisia? So Tunisia actually is like, man, it's extremely close to Europe, right? So it's on the tip of Africa, of North Africa, and when you're looking at the north tip of it, it's only a few hundred miles from Italy and Spain, right? So it's got a pretty good Mediterranean climate. I imagine, you know, I don't see polyline or drip line or irrigation through many of these farms that are in this article in Tunisia, nor did I see any in the YouTube videos that I researched for this, and it got me thinking, and I'm just like, I'm pretty sure they're just dry farming this in the Mediterranean climate, right, like the cactus, which is a cool thing. Like, I'll give them that. Like, dry farming is probably like helping them a lot, but to also put it in perspective, if they were irrigating, this problem would be far, far worse. I mean, like a lot of the issue of plagues, specifically in cactus, is usually due to high humidity in the soil and at the base of the tree. And this is something they even mention in Tunisia, some of the farmers. They say it starts at the base of the tree, the cochineal plague, and it goes throughout the whole tree and destroys it, turning it gray, and all the new growth starts to be infected as well. So it got me thinking, I'm like, there's probably just too much water also affecting these cacti, right? So if they had a polyculture of trees and a polyculture of other shrubs and plants that were native to Tunisia, they would have a far better chance of stopping the spread of a lot of this stuff. But because they have so much prickly pear, they're just getting screwed, right? So let's put it into perspective how much even they have, right? So this article talks about them having in Tunisia 600,000 hectares of prickly pear. To put that into perspective, I'll give you some different facts. So how big even is that? Each hectare is 2.47 acres. So talking American, this is 1.48 million acres. Now, what is that even compared to a big ag state like California? The number one planted crop in California is grapes. Now, there's 600,000 acres of grapes. Let me get the exact number, actually. Hold up. Yeah, there's 610,000 acres of grapes planted in 2023. That's probably dropping, actually, because of the wine glut and everybody getting, super fucked and screwed, and they can't sell it, and distributors have years of supply, and so they're super just boned right now. Everybody's going out of business. If you want to buy a winery, it's probably the time of life to get a deal. But anyways, so they have 610,000 acres of grapes in California, and they have 125,000 table grapes. So 25,000 acres of table grapes. So combined, that's 735,000 acres. Much less than half of what is planted of Opuntia prickly pear in Tunisia. And much like California, where we have a lot of the, wine plagues and, blights and all of this stuff affecting the whole state because everybody's got the same freaking grapes planted. Once Tunisia identified the cochineal, it pretty much spread everywhere because of how much it's planted, right? So to put it into perspective, even for Tunisia, 12% of the whole country is prickly pear. It's the number 2 crop in Tunisia, only behind olive trees. So it's a giant fucking industry in Tunisia, right? I mean, it's gigantic. Even comparing it to California's largest industry, it is very large. You know what I mean? So Tunisia's got so much prickly pear that, for several years, it just looked like the grapes here in California, like infinite growth, like everybody's making money, it's all Gucci. And then, boom, they got hit with it just under 3 years ago. So they identified cochineal in Morocco, which is directly to the left of Tunisia, in 2016. It took 5 years to get to Tunisia in 2021, 3 years ago, or 4 years now, because we're in 2025. And it basically, ever since then, has completely screwed them. So they're losing in some years up to 30% of their prickly pear harvest that they had prior to the cochineal coming into the country, which is insane. I mean, 30% is like, if you do 30% of, 1.5 million acres that they have, that's like 450,000 acres that they're losing of production a year because they planted a monoculture and this plague is just destroying them. So, yeah, I mean, not looking good for Tunisia, to be honest with you. This is why in the Italian Cactus podcast, talking about how they're growing this in Italy, I mentioned that they need to take heed from Tunisia, which is directly across the Mediterranean Sea from them, and not be such dumbasses to plant only a monoculture, because in just a decade or two, I would guarantee that cochineal will be in Italy, and they will have the same issue. They have the same exact plant, and if you think that it's, on the other side of the Mediterranean, Tunisia, not going to cross in Italy, it's going to happen. You know what I mean? I don't know exact figures or whatever, but I imagine Tunisia being so close to Italy and Spain, a lot of the prickly pear industry that they have is probably going to Europe. So to think that none of this cochineal is going to be passed through the distribution line, that's a fucking joke. You know what I mean? I don't know how amazing the border is in Italy as far as here in the U.S., you can't even bring a plant in. They'll fucking check it for everything. You know what I mean? To make sure that plant doesn't have fungus or pest or whatever that's coming in, right? Because one little pest in a few years can decimate everything. Just look at the little bug that's affecting citrus in California right now. You can't move citrus in or out of California because of this little bug, and essentially it's shut down our citrus industry, right? Because we're all under quarantine. So this little bug came from China. I think it's a beetle or something, I forget. It's like HHB bug or something. But these little bugs completely decimated California citrus, right? And we're under quarantine, and so yeah, I don't know how good the biocontrols are at the border in Italy, but I imagine the more cactus that they plant, you got to think about it too. Where do you think they're getting all these pads? You get me? In Italy, if you wanted to do a large commercial scale planting of a prickly pear, you're likely going to even look towards Tunisia, because they're one of the world's largest prickly pear growers in the world, to find cheap pads for you, right? Which I told you can be a big issue if you're bringing some of these plagues in to your country. So what can we learn from this? You know what I mean? As Californians, as global cactus growers, wherever the hell you're growing cactus around the world, your backyard, don't plant a monoculture. A monoculture, no matter the country, will fail. Maybe in 1 year, maybe in 30, but eventually it ends up failing. No matter if it's bananas in Guatemala, no matter if it's avocado in California or citrus in Florida, or even look at the plagues that are beginning to affect almond and the nut tree industry in California. When you introduce something new to a place, sure, it's going to take some time for nature to figure out how to screw you. But once it does, and you have a monoculture system, it hits you hard. Hits you hard as hell. So now I'm seeing, a lot of this monoculture cactus go through the same stuff, no matter the country. Tunisia is just some of the first stuff that's reported because it has such a large industry, but I do not believe that those plagues will be limited to one country or whatever, right? But yeah, I think the lesson also is to not only plant cactus, plant agave, plant different shrubs, plant different trees. The fact they have 12% of their landmass literally being cactus, one species, is a joke. How did you expect nothing bad to happen? Because plants or insects got to eat. Fungi has to exist in the ecosystem. And when you only have one plant, what do you think is going to happen? It's going to figure out a way to prosper in this ecosystem by destroying your big old monoculture thing, So I think California needs to heed the warnings of Tunisia and not try to go down the same path, which I'm seeing. I see a lot of, for instance, people wanting to get into planting cactus in California, and then they'll go buy a bunch of fucking prickly pear pads that are Opuntia ficus indica because it's the most commonly found plant in nurseries or, in big box stores or even naturalized around California, and plant that. And then a couple years down the line, when everything's all successful, they're like, oh shit, we're getting hit with this plague. Like, why? You have to plan from the beginning. Say you have Opuntia ficus indica, then you got some Opuntia faecantha, which is native to California, or some Cylindropuntia imbricata, or Echinocarpa, and then you got some, different Cereuses, some Opuntia littoralis, that's naturalized to California, or some Opuntia linguiformis, the Texas prickly pear. This shit would not be jumping like wildfire everywhere. You get me? Because there's just so many different species. And obviously, every species is affected differently by not only plagues, but by pests and everything, right? So, if they would have had a diversity of cactus, Tunisia could have avoided this. If Italy plants what Tunisia is, they're going to go through the same issue. So they need to, how I mentioned in the other podcast, plant a polyculture or they're going to be pretty screwed too, man. I mean, I don't think it'll be any better for them, So let's talk about, some of the stuff that maybe Tunisia is doing, right, to try to prevent some of this stuff. And I'll give my opinion on it because it's like in the article they mentioned that they created a $500,000 fund, $500,000, to basically try to introduce ladybugs to eat the cochineal in the country. Now, it sounds good in theory, right? Like, it'll probably work a small amount. But here's my concerns. It's like, if you're introducing tons of ladybugs to an area that they're not native to, even if they are eating the cochineal, this is a problem that has plagued ecologists forever. It's like you start to upset the natural balance, right? So what is millions of ladybugs coming into this area now due to the other insects that are there or due to the natural cycle of the ecosystem, right? So you don't want to introduce the ladybugs to get rid of the cochineal and then be ended up or left with 12 different other new issues that now you're like, what the fuck, And that happens all the time. So that's why I always prefer doing, a solution that is not going to introduce new types of problems like that. You got to really think about how you address that. And here's the other thing. I don't really think that $500,000 is enough. Like, even if they wanted this to actually succeed, they probably need like hundreds of millions of dollars of a program that is breeding and releasing ladybugs to even have a minuscule effect. You get me? So I think that's a lost cause, to be honest with you. I don't think that money is going to really do much in the prevention of cochineal in the country. What they need to do is completely change their farming practices and completely change the species that are on their farm, right? Because here's the thing, it's like, I always tell people this when I manage cochineal on cactus farms or, in gardens on cactus or even on my own cactus. It's like, if I see cochineal, I'll give you an example. I saw cochineal on a Opuntia littoralis. I identify it. Yep, it's cochineal. I see it on some new pads. I'm like, cool. I check the water on the soil, super high. I fucking stressed the shit out of that Opuntia littoralis. Didn't even water it for like, I don't know, man, maybe 3 months, 4 months. No more cochineal. And then I started watering it again, and it came back nicely. There's no cochineal. The problem there, in my opinion, was that I overwatered it, and then nature is seeing this cactus overwatered, and it's now the perfect environment for, the cochineal insect to move in. So how did the cochineal even get there, right, in the first place? I got cochineal on my Apunte cochineal, and I harvest it, and I use it for dyeing, and I, even sell it by the pound sometimes. Well, I did now. I can't no more because the Apunte cochineal, which was at the Altadena home by, I had like dozens of mother trees that were large, now is gone. So probably you have to rebuild that over here on the Lancaster farms. But the point is, I could harvest it symbiotically. It could live on that cactus symbiotically, and I brought some over here, and it probably spread onto the other cactus, right? So I identify that, and then I realize I gotta watch out for it, not overwater the cactus, right? So I'm just like now every potted cactus really watching out for it. And not only that, I know that cochineal spreads to agave. So I keep infected plants super far away in quarantine. And if I'm putting for instance, agave next to a cactus, I'm pretty much going to assume that the cochineal can spread to both of those plants. So I'm going to manage both of them in a certain way, right, to keep their soil system very dry. And cochineal loves wet and loves, like heat. You get me? So if you have a warm temperature and you have a lot of water in that cactus or soil, now you have a great breeding ground for this cochineal. So you have to think, how do I have the opposite? How can I keep this cactus the driest possible? How can I keep this cactus, kind of stressed a little bit, you could say, so that this doesn't occur to me, right? And that's where the management comes in. It's like not when you get the fucking plague. You have to pre-manage, man. And the reason I brought that little story up of that Apunte littoralis is that, how the Tunisian farmers were saying this plague was starting at the base of the tree and they couldn't prevent it at all. Well, as I also mentioned, they're dry farming it. So there's too much water in the soil for this non-native cactus that's growing in Tunisia. That's what I observe as a consultant, right, looking at this situation. Now, how do I get rid of water and keep the cactus, right? Now, if I plant cactus alongside trees, more than likely those trees are going to get rid of that water, right? Because they're going to be growing vertically, growing very high up. And that's what you see. I mean, you go to the Cerro in Guanajuato or Jalisco, and you see that. You get me? Like, you see, or the Cerro is like, what is this word in English? It's not very easily translated. It's like a forest, or like a chaparral, or like a mountain, or like a just ecosystem that's like far from humans, you know what I mean? It can have a lot of different meanings, but in this particular case, the Cerro would be like a desert ecosystem, kind of foresty. So a lot of the cactus in Jalisco and Guanajuato is growing in the forest, right, under trees. And you're like, oh, but it needs sun and it needs all this, environment that you give it in your garden or whatever. Yes, it does need sun. But it also needs to not have so much fucking water available for it, right? So you have to have a balance of all of these. And the trees that I noticed, they were able to grow very well. The cactus were able to grow very well. So when I am arming my business here and I'm like, well, how do I fucking make my farm super productive and not have a lot of these plagues and stuff? I'm incorporating trees right next to the cactus to try to take up that excess water so that these plagues stay the fuck away. And obviously in a monoculture of Apunte ficus indica in Tunisia or Italy or California or Brazil or Mexico, whatever, you're not going to have that. There's excess water always sitting in the soil. You get me? So here's the other thing. It's like a lot of these soils hold water like their life depended on it. You get me? So you have to plant different shrubs and trees to try to have that water, that hydrological cycle in balance. You get me? Because having an excess of water and your only plant is cactus, that is an imbalance. You get me? Like that is not going to work. I mean, no matter how you look at it, you know. I think that. Oh man, sorry, I was making coffee. I forgot where I put my coffee cup. I'll be right back. Sorry, I came to grab my coffee cup, but yeah, what I was saying is just that you have to try to balance everything, the chemicals, the water, everything that's on your ecosystem or your farm, which is an ecosystem. If one thing is out of balance, it starts to throw everything off. No matter if it's, you know, you got an excess of nitrogen, you start to get runoff that destroy your water systems. You get an excess of, an excess of carbon would probably be a good thing because the plants would probably eat it and shit. But you get an excess of water, you start to invite a lot of plagues and a lot of, you know, pests and stuff. You get, you know, in excess of lots of other minerals, it starts to block out a lot of the other minerals that might be in your soil, right? So having for instance, a super high amount of, you know, one of the trace minerals can just block a lot of the other ones. Sometimes it's a weird thing. You got to have everything in balance, no matter really if it's a chemical or if it's water or if it's plants or if it's species. It's like you just have to have a balance. But yeah, it's like they were talking about these small farmers about some of the things that they think can help them, right? And I wanted to talk about that too, besides the obvious one, which was the ladybugs, right? It's like essentially they're thinking, okay, well, if we change our pruning practices, then maybe we'll have, you know, much better luck with all this. And how I've mentioned many times before, when I'm trimming trees, I clean in between every tree, my chainsaw and my pruners and stuff, when I know that this tree is diseased, right? So I agree the change in pruning technique may aid in a portion of the problem that they're encountering, but I don't really think that that's a solution, to be honest with you, because I see the same thing in LA. It's like you could be super cautious trying to, you know, clean all your tools and clean everything, but what you don't account for is other people, and other people aren't going to clean their tools and stuff and still spread it to you. I can give an example of a tree that I trimmed. I knew it was plagued, and you know, I had another arborist come out and treat it for the client because that was the approach that they wanted to take. And tree is plague free. I trim it every year for about 3 years. Then the power company comes through, and shortly after we saw a plague on the tree again. And I told my client, I'm like, yeah, they probably didn't clean their tools. And you know, I mean, she was a super rich client. She told me I think she was going to try to sue him or whatever, but I don't know what exactly transpired after that. I just know she for sure had a super long conversation with him and got really pissed off at him. So, but the result, I don't know what the fuck happened there, you know? But just to show you that example that you can do everything right, but then somebody else will come and touch the tree or the plant, and then you're screwed. And how could this happen in Tunisia? Through a lot of the distribution system, right? So if you're not properly cleaning your cactus pads and your cactus prickly pear that's being shipped out, a lot of the same distribution network is how a lot of this stuff ends up spreading. A lot of the time it's like, it can go onto a production line, and then, the cochineal could be, for instance, on the truck, or it could be on the baskets, or it could be on any of the places where this cactus is going. And when they come back to your farm, they could be unintentionally spreading it to you. You know what I mean? Well, this is something I've talked about with agave, and it's like humidors or truckers or different types of service businesses, you could say, that work for multiple farmers or multiple distributors. A lot of the times, they're the ones spreading it unintentionally. They usually don't even know that they're doing it because a lot of this shit is microscopic. It's like not like you can readily tell a lot of the time what the hell is even going on. Like, for instance, when a plague is brought to the United States, right, like on produce or something, a lot of the times they clean that fruit. A lot of the times it wasn't inspected. And a lot of the times they would pass through USDA inspection, which is even more rigorous. So there's always, like, if these networks exist, distribution networks, a small amount will always get by, no matter how much you try to prevent it. So in my eyes, I more so think it's not that I won't get a plague on my farm, it's more so when. So I try to prevent a lot of that stuff so that when it does come to me, it can't really do much, right? Because say a plague comes here that I haven't experienced, right? Like the black cactus plague that I was explaining from Mexico, right? I have dozens of different cactus, agave, trees, native shrubs, and plants. It would be very, very difficult for this to be passing from species to species. And if I saw it took out all my Opuntia ficus indica, cool. I got 35 or 40 other species of cactus that I can still have in production. So then what do I try to do? I try to go get another cultivar, another hybrid, another subspecies of Opuntia ficus indica, and plant that. Why? Because now that I know that a certain species might be affected, I'm not going to go be a dumbass and plant the same fucking species again, because I already know that it's difficult to manage. Now, a monoculture system can't do that. If your one species goes down, it's not like you can replant 10,000 acres. You know what I mean? So that's the benefit of having a polyculture system. You can literally have whole species go down, and you're like, I don't give a fuck. Got a whole bunch more. Let's go get another one and put it there in its place. Or maybe you have other more prosperous species that you're just like, fuck it, I'm going to plant one more row of this now because it's not getting plague and it's not being susceptible and not giving me these issues. So why would you even want this plant, right? Like I always tell people, like, why do you even want to plant Opuntia ficus indica if you know it's the most heavily plagued cactus in the world and the one that's most affected by plague or by pest? Because when you plant it, you have to expect that will hit you. You get me? When I plant a Texas prickly pear, I'm not expecting cochineal to come. I'm not expecting the black fungus. I'm not expecting any of these diseases because until it's identified on it, you know what I mean? I mean, you don't want to be the fucking first, but it's like, usually it doesn't transpass species like that, so easily. So if the point being, if you see a heavily affected species, why the fuck do you even want to plant that? This has been my whole thing with the agave tequiliana and agave espadin, which once again are both agave angustifolia subspecies, right? So I've always said, why do you want to plant this agave in California when you know it's being attacked by the agave weevil, when you know it's being attacked by tons of fucking fungus, when you know it's being super weak, it can't even take any cold tolerance. If it gets above 115, it starts to fucking get sad. It's like, why do you want a weak agave that everybody's planting and is a commodity and is just going to bring you problems? Like, if I was Tunisia, I would not replant Opuntia ficus indica. If you're losing 30% of your production, why the fuck are you trying to figure out solutions to try to save that? You get me? Go get some Texas prickly pear. Go get some fucking tulip prickly pear. Go get some fucking any of these 1,000 other cactus species and plant it. Replant that. You're probably not going to get the plague.
you're probably going to fucking not have the same issues. But they're just, what we say in Spanish, so necios. You know what I mean? So hard-headed. They're just like, this is the only way. And it's like, that's what always pisses me off. Because I'm like, man, the government at the same time, they're the fucking idiots for allowing people to do that. You know what I mean? If I was Tunisia's government and I saw 30% of production getting wiped out by a plague, I'd be like, you know what? Maybe what we're doing is not working. Let's rethink this a little bit, right? And getting to the other point that these small farmers were saying that might help them get rid of this cochineal, you know, the change in ag practice. They're talking about, you know, how can we try different forms of farming to get rid of this plague? And that's the shit that I'm telling you. Try new, different cactus species. Try doing different trees. Why? They said that the olives is another big productive thing for them. Why are they not planting the cactus with olives and having breaks that this cochineal cannot pass through the cactus trees? Why are they not having, you know, polyculture of different plants that are big in Tunisia planted alongside cactus? I don't get it. You know, those are questions that their food and ag ministry needs to fucking solve for their farmers, in my opinion, because it's only going to get worse. I mean, it's already affected such a large percentage of their production that because of those distribution networks that I was telling you about, it's likely going to be within the, if it took 4 years to hit a third of the country, you can almost bet or expect that within another decade or two, it will be within the majority of Tunisia, the whole country. And what happens then? Like, do they just lose their number 2 crop, a crop that's 1.5 million acres? What does that mean for economic potential of this North African country? It's not good. That's why, you know, they need they need to change their ways big time, man. I mean, you know, if anybody from Tunisia ends up listening to this, that's, you know, it's super unlikely, probably, but if anyone from the Tunisian government needs me as a consultant, I could solve this problem fast as hell. I don't know why they're like stressing so hard about this and like just letting themselves get owned. I don't get it, to be honest with you. They need to get better consultants and better agricultural managers, because whoever is consulting and advising them on these farms should be fired. Like, they for sure don't know what the fuck they're doing. You know what I mean? Yeah. I mean, once again, like, it was identified 4 years ago. The fact that it's reached such a large scale showed the complete failure of that government to control the plague. Not that I want monoculture systems to succeed, but I probably could have done much more help at the beginning of the plague versus already them losing 20-30% production in some years, you know. Yeah, it's just, you know, they also talk about how they think that cleaning up all their production areas can be, you know, something that stops the spread of this, and I agree it'll stop and slow down the spread, or I agree it'll slow down the spread, but stopping the spread, I think, is that's not going to happen. Like, they need to be realistic, you know what I mean? Like, there's such an interconnectivity between agriculture, especially small farms, because they usually focus on just the farming. You get me? They're not out there trying to move their product. They're not out there trying to harvest their product. They bring in big teams to do that. You know, like, for instance, I bet you a lot of the small farmers do what we do in Mexico, which is, I mean, they might farm the prickly pear and shit, but when it comes plant time, harvest time, cut time, they're getting groups or hiring contractors to come and bring large amounts of labor to do these jobs. So, you know, pretty similar, I would imagine, in Tunisia, where a lot of these, you know, harvest networks, labor networks, distribution networks, they're going to be the ones, to be honest, spreading the disease, which is usually what happens in a lot of things, right? It's like, yeah, I don't see that being a plausible solution.
to be honest. I mean, as I said, it'll slow it down, but it won't stop it. They need a solution that'll stop it, which is going to be a polyculture, and chemical free. It can't be how they're mentioning, like, a lot of other farmers, that they're just spraying chemicals like crazy to try to get rid of this, and it's working. But I was having this conversation about agave weevil with somebody today, and it's like, these chemicals do work. I mean, a lot of the times to get rid of these pests and plagues, but what ends up happening is what happened with weed killer, or with in plants, or antibiotics in animals. You end up getting rid of the natural resistance of the plant, even if it was a small amount, and you end up destroying its ability to fight. And what ends up happening is you need to apply more every single application to have the same result. And that ends up destroying our soil and water systems, and us, like humans and other animals that eat all this shit. So I don't see that as a long-term solution either. I mean, poisoning the ecosystem and humanity to maintain your monoculture system doesn't really sound like a smart economic plan or ecological plan, to be honest, or health plan. So yeah, I think they need to just completely rethink how they're doing it, to be honest. I don't think that cleaning of production areas will be the big help that they believe. Yeah, I mean, it's something weird to me. Like I mentioned at the beginning, it's just like, this thing has been grown for thousands of years. I mean, this one lady in this other article I was talking about, what's her name? It's Quetzalina Sanchez, an expert in indigenous textiles. She mentions this shit was used from like 2000 BC. That's like 4,000 years of cochineal production and use. You get me? And the only thing that started to take it out was in the 1800s, the synthetic dyes, which a lot of that stuff is petroleum based. So it's like, yeah, when the industrial age started booming, then they got rid of a lot of these dyes. But then that's why, our rivers started going to shit, and we started going to shit because we use all this dyes on our clothes, and it's on our skin, So skin is one of your largest organs, and you absorb a lot of stuff through it. So your clothes being made of synthetic dyes is not the best. Yeah, it's not good at all. But when we had red dye from the cochineal, I mean, this other article where I was saying that I saw this lady Quetzalina Sanchez talking. It was talking about how it launched, from the time that the Aztecs were conquered and they found out about cochineal. From the 1500s to the 1800s was like 200-300 years of cochineal going all over Europe and going through all the royalty because they couldn't find such a beautiful red, and everybody wanted it. And I'm just like, this is an organic dye. Like, this is ridiculous to me that, one, it's even an issue. Like, they should be harvesting it. But now it's just got out of control, right? It's kind of like the whole Australia thing that I explained to you. It's like Australia, instead of becoming a cactus and prickly pear fucking powerhouse, they decided to, like, chemically poison half of their country to try to get rid of this shit. Which is an idiotic solution. Like, my friend that grows agave in Australia told me that the government actually tells you to get rid of all the prickly pear that's on your land. And I'm just like, what the fuck? Like, this is insane. Like, I've never would assume that the Australians would want to just go so crazy against the plant. But I mean, they lost the war against emus, like I mentioned, and lost. So it's not like they're very good on starting wars. But yeah, it's just I wanted to talk about this article today because I think that there's a lot of stuff that California needs to heed warning from Tunisia and not go down the same path and make the same mistakes. And a polyculture of agave, cactus, native plants and shrubs, trees that are in your area, and then bringing in other productive native or native shrubs, trees, and plants. That is the system that every country implemented for thousands of years, and it succeeded. You get me? So only during the industrial age did everybody start to begin to do what the UK, what America, form of agriculture of heavily petroleum-based synthetic fertilizer and all these chemicals that got rid of pests and yeah, it's like, to me, that system was meant to sell. It was not meant to make better or more food. You know what I mean? Like, people always say, oh, well, we need all these chemicals and all these tractors and all that to produce all the food for the people. It's like, we did just fine before all that shit. I don't know what you're talking about. Like, we didn't need all that. Does it make it more efficient? How I mentioned in other podcasts. Probably not when you're accounting for all these other externalities. I mean, like, I give an example of the Dust Bowl, right? It's like, go to the 1930s, we have decades, if not a century, of great grain production, and then they essentially stripped all their fucking soil. And it started blowing away, and it created the Dust Bowl. All these people have to move away from places like Oklahoma, and that's why a lot of the people in the Central Valley, they ended up settling there. A lot of the rural California folk actually settled in the early 20th century in California were from the Dust Bowl region because they lost their agricultural land. And crazy enough, these people didn't learn. They come to California and do the same shit. And we're still doing it 100 years later in 2025. Just strip tilling farming. And it's like, that stuff that you always hear in news and stuff. It's like, we got, I don't know what the exact number that these idiots use, but it's like, they're like, oh, we got 30 more years of soil. We got 50 more years of soil. You know why they say that? Because if you continue all these monoculture strip tilling systems, that's how much soil they're getting rid of, right? And it's definitely not such a good thing. It's like, you got all these systems that the point that I was getting at is, what is the cost of producing efficient food for 100 years, but then completely destroying the ecosystem to the point where these complete regions could not do agriculture anymore? So, in my opinion, yes, the petroleum, based synthetic agriculture of America and the UK is efficient, but maybe only for 50, 100 years, bro, before you destroy the shit so bad that you have to move somewhere else to do it. So when you account for the environment externalities, for the groundwater externalities, I don't actually think it's efficient. I actually think it's the reverse. I think it's inefficient and uneconomic. Look at right now what's happening with the Aguadala aquifer, under a lot of the Midwest. It's like they're completely destroying their groundwater resources to grow a bunch of fucking crops. And these crops are growing efficiently, you could say, on tractor-based big ag systems, right? Chemical-based systems. Well, what happens when the water runs out? All the people can't live there, or they have poisoned water, and they can't grow any more food. So it's like, once again, like, if these systems don't last forever. Now compare that to a native indigenous system like the Amazon or like the California forest managed by the indigenous Californians that went on for thousands of fucking years and were super economically productive for them and provided their sustenance. I mean, to me, the which system is better is very clear, because industrial agriculture has only been around for 200 years, and in the majority of the places where it's prospered are completely fucking destroyed. So it's like, the other system has improved ecosystems for thousands of years. They don't even come close to each other. So, efficient, I always say, for who? You know what I mean? Efficient for hedge fund managers in Wall Street. It's not efficient, these systems, for humanity, the planet, or even the economy. Definitely not the economy. That's why, I hope that people start learning to not do this type of farming anymore. You know what I mean? I don't think that monoculture is going to be a dominant form of agriculture in 100 years. I think we're going to go back to the old systems, the traditional systems, and start creating these ecosystem farms, how I've explained, and that benefit the environment and grow it and make it evolve instead of destroying it. So, yeah, a lot of lessons to learn from, cactus farming all over the world, and I don't want California to go through the same idiotic mistakes. That's why I made this podcast, because, in 20 years, my ideal cactus industry in California would be taking half of the 735,000 acres of grapes, which are big water wasters, and because they have a glut, the whole big thing, right? Like even the Wine Grape Growers Association president said, we need to get the fuck rid of like 50,000 acres. I'm over here like, I think that's a low ball. I think we should get rid of 100,000 acres. And I'm telling you, in 20, 30 years, I'd love for 300,000 of those grapes to be agave cactus. And, I'd love for, the 150,000 acres of cactus to be a beautiful polyculture system, you know what I mean? Of cactus and agave and trees and stuff. And it's just like, I don't understand why everyone wants to focus on one thing. Humans are very unique creatures that have so many different, ways that they enjoy their life. It's like, why choose one crop? Like whoever begun this system is just crazy, because it's like, it's monoculture is no good. I don't know how many times I can say it, but I'm sure if you listen to the podcast religiously, then you already know that, man. That's just probably already ingrained in your head. Monoculture shit. But yeah, California, learn from Tunisia, learn from Italy, Brazil, Mexico. Don't make the same fucking mistakes in cactus and agave as them. And I think we'll be all right. I think, for instance, like I told you, if cactus and agave took over half of what the grapes are doing, we could use 90%, 95% less water. We would have, probably 3 to 5 times more biomass that we could put into spirits or fermentation products or different other products like forages and, but you'd also be producing something now that is unique and new, right? So wine, California is very unique wine producer and region, but because of this glut and because of wine consumption going down around the world, and it's just not a crop that I believe can be taken California to the next level. And as we start to lose a lot of these water resources, like look at a lot of controversy a few months back when they announced that 75% of the water coming out of Lake Berryessa that goes to farmers and cities would probably be cut, right? So it's like a lot of these water regions in California are most likely within the next decade or few decades going to have best case probably 25%, worst case probably 90% of their water allocations cut. And that is to bring us into compliance with the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. Can't be using more than what's being put in. And the only way that we could grow California's economy and still keep a lot of this economic potential, and we're going to be getting rid of hundreds of thousands of acres of agricultural land, is to bring in innovative new crops like agave and cactus, thousands of species within both of those families, planting all of those motherfuckers all over California, and producing thousands of new innovative products, not only wine, not only spirits, but concrete, fiber cement, fiber insulations, saponin research, and medicinal products. I think all of these things is what
can now boost the economy, right? So if you take out 300,000 acres of grapes in California, that's a lot of booming economic potential, right? Like I just told you, it's the number one crop in California. Like there's tens of billions of dollars in the grape industry. If you lose half that shit, you're talking about, dude, I mean, tens of billions lost, right? So that's where agave and cactus can come in. And if we're getting more biomass, we're getting more products that can be made, then now you actually, instead of losing, say the example, I don't know the exact number off the top of my head, but say the California grape industry is 60 billion. If you theoretically got rid of half of that, you would lose $30 billion in economic potential, right? But now, if you have 3-5 times more biomass per acre being produced from the prickly pears and agave than you did from the grapes, theoretically, with good entrepreneurs and a good, healthy economy, you should be able to, from that minus 30 billion, go up, 60 or 90 billion dollars. And it ends up at the end of the day being an economic windfall for the state, and we end up having a large water savings, and we end up having a better system than monoculture grapes all over California. So why I even mention that is I think that like California, it needs to not do the same mistakes, right? And a big thing that right now is hurting these places, I believe, in like Tunisia and Mexico, is that they have all their agave or all their cactus focused on just a select amount of industries, usually less than 3. And that is why a lot of it, goes through these boom and bust cycles, because whenever those industries go down or up, they're at the whim of it. So here in California, we want to have tons and tons of different, industries, right? So I give the example of the cochineal. If I was in Tunisia and I had a bunch of cochineal on my plants, much like I do here, or I give a better example. I'll give you an example of me here. When I have a bunch of cochineal on my cochineal cactus in Altadena, I would cut it down to the trunk. I'd be like, fuck it, I'm going to start it new. It's going to grow back all nice and cool after without the plague. I cut all that shit down and give it to my animals. So if there was a forage industry in Tunisia, when this plague was young and it was not affecting the majority of the species, they could have cut it all down, sold it as forage, and made a bunch of money, instead of trying to chemically poison their whole fucking soil and water systems and lose this war, right? So if they had another industry that they could have threw the cactus into, that was prosperous, they could have got rid of that disease much earlier and then, adapted. But because a lot of their industry is going into just straight prickly pears, they're not using the cactus as much as, for forage as, they should really. So California needs to just develop lots of industries. I don't want them to develop just 1 or 2 for agave or cactus. I always say at least a dozen for each of them, especially with cactus. It's like there's already so many proven ways that could be used, So yeah, I don't want to make this podcast extremely long, but I hope you learned something today. And like I said, as always, this article was probably like 5-minute read, but then I turned it into an hour podcast. It's just like that's why I made the podcast, actually. It's like they leave out a lot of the stuff that's really crucial and important when you're talking about these things in the reporting. And I understand it. Motherfuckers can't even, their attention spans are so low because of TikTok and Instagram Reels. It's like, even keeping someone there for 5 minutes to read that article, I bet you the majority didn't. You know what I mean? So I get where they're coming from, but I always wish they would put out like a second article that's like super fucking in depth, for the people that actually want to learn more about it. But like I read this article and then I started going into cochineal research and into the comparisons to California and what's going on in different countries.
countries and how Tunisia is learning or not learning and what they could do or not do. And, I learned a lot to just make this podcast, but it's like, that's the shit that I wish the reporter would have done, because I'm not being paid and they get paid for this shit. So, like I've mentioned a lot, it's like sometimes when they report on plants, they don't make it, how do I explain it? They just don't tell you the full picture. You know what I mean? Because looking at Tunisia's cactus plague problem only through the eyes of Tunisia, I mean, you think it's like this big unsolvable crisis that like is just like they can't do anything and they're just getting screwed, right? That's like how the article puts it. It's like, oh man, they're done, But then I'm reading it and I'm like thinking as I read every single line like 10 fucking solutions. So it's like, I wish they would have thought of that too and been like, oh, here's these other examples of different places around the world where they're not encountering this problem, and this is how they're fucking seeing this works for them, and blah, blah, blah. So, yeah, if you're a reporter, maybe that's something you work on, but, yeah, hope you learned something about cactus farming, and definitely hope you got in your head that monoculture systems, no matter what country, they always end up failing, Isn't that the craziest shit? But, yeah, cactus farming in Tunisia. Once again, any farmers in Tunisia, if you're going to ever need any help, I consult remote too, man. Hit me up. I actually consulted on cactus farm in Morocco before. Not like there. Obviously, I do it remote. But shit, man, I would love to go to fucking Tunisia, Pay my flight, I'll go anywhere. I've consulted for some different people around the world, and that's what I always tell them. I'm like, yeah, I really don't want to go there, but if you pay me enough, I'll go anywhere, man. But yeah, go out there and plant a polyculture of agave and cactus and trees, If you've learned anything from this podcast, it's don't put all your eggs in one basket, and stay the fuck away from a Puntia ficus indica if you're getting into cactus farming. That's one of my biggest recommendations. Some of the cultivars are sick, like the spineless Burbank that I got, but if you're getting the main Puntia ficus indica, you better get a consultant day one, because this shit is going to hit you hard. So yeah. Have a good one, everyone. And I'll catch you on the next one. Hopefully the the next podcast that I do will be on agave. I wanted to talk about maybe some of the agave history here in California, and some of the different plants that maybe they might have thought were agave, right? So I'll give you a little snippet. It's like up until like a couple decades ago, yuccas were actually in the same genus as agave, and a lot of agave and yucca look very similar. And there's this particular yucca species in California that was harvested and roasted for thousands of years, 5,000 to 7,000 years of history, by the Serrano people, and it's called Hespero Yucca Whippley. And I believe that it's it was seen by these people as an agave because the way that I've researched it, they pretty much treated it like an agave. And yeah, I'd like to go into some of the agave and agave-like species that were used in California. So we'll do another podcast on that later. But yeah, have a great rest of the day, everyone, and keep on planting agave and cactus. Peace out.